So Call of Duty, it's in a weird spot right now, as the last few iterations have been somewhat lukewarm, if not, flat out travesties. After Ghost, Call of Duty has become less and less palatable to the old school Call of Duty fanbase. There were some bright lights, when you look at Black Ops 3, the flash in a pan World War II, and more recently, Modern Warfare, the reimagining of Call of Duty 4. But in between each one of those games, there were some tremendous flops that I would be remiss if I didn't mention them. With Advanced Warfare being very hit or miss with the fans, Black Ops 4, even though Blackout was a hit with some YouTubers, Black Ops 4 was, in my own personal experience, one of the worst games to try and offload on the Call of Duty community. In my own personal experience in the video game industry, me and my team found ourselves trying to offload hundreds upon hundreds of Black Ops 4 discs for $5 a pop just to get it off our shelves to make room for Modern Warfare. And, then of course, Infinite Warfare. We don't really talk about that one. However, in light of Call of Duty taking a step back to their roots and going back to games that really blew up the mainstream, I thought, why not take a step further and really go back to the game that I believe built the foundation for the true Call of Duty experience that we know and love today, and that is Call of Duty 3. Now you may be wondering why I picked Call of Duty 3 over say Modern Warfare or World at War. Well, it's for a few reasons. A personal reason, or personal set of reasons I guess I should say, was that it was one of my first experiences with not only Call of Duty, but also FPS games in general. Beyond that, it was also a huge bonding point for my cousin and I, as we would always play this game whenever we had sleepovers together. The other reason is that the way that they designed and organized the game, as well as the refinement of the other elements of the game that were already built within the franchise, really helped build up and resemble an older version of the current Call of Duty experience. What this video is meant to do is to give newer audiences an overview of the game, as well as give older audiences an idea and an analysis on why I think this game was so relevant to the series despite its flaws. Now, in order to help organize my thoughts and make it a little bit easier to jump around the video, you all can thank me for those timestamps down below with, a like. I will break this game up into a few different sections. I will give a brief overview of the player objectives in the campaign, as well as the perspectives this story will be told from. From there, I'll transition into the major changes that separate this game from its predecessors, as well as a breakdown of what the game did right, what it did wrong, and finishing off with my thoughts on the game as to why I think it is an important game to the franchise, as well as to what I think of the game from an objective standpoint, as well as a personal standpoint. Call of Duty 3 is a World War II military first-person shooter that is following the Allies' efforts to eliminate the German footholds that they have planted within the eastern and western parts of Europe. The game tells the story through 4 different campaigns: the American, British/French, Canadian, and Polish campaigns against the Germans. You will play as 4 different soldiers throughout the campaign, each experiencing the war from different perspectives with different objectives. During the campaigns, the developers make it clear that you are fighting for a different country aside from the utilization of cutscenes and dialogue. Each soldier will be using different weapons that are akin to what their respective militaries would have been privy to at that time. As such, each campaign, while you will be jumping in between perspectives as you progress throughout the story, it will be clear as to who you are fighting as. Now, before I get into the perspectives, for those of you concerned about spoilers on a game, over a decade old, I will have some spoilers when we go over the criticisms of the game, so be warned now.
The former City of Light waits for the Allies to arrive and lift the shadow that has fallen over Paris. However, the heroism of D-Day will have been for nothing if the Allies cannot hold the land beyond the beaches of Normandy.
In the American campaign, you follow the story of Private Nichols, a soldier pulled in to replace a recent casualty just outside of St. Lo. your first entry into combat taking place after the Normandy invasion. There isn't much of an introduction to your other squad mates, but you do go into battle with them throughout the series, so therefore they're going to be worth mentioning. Throughout the journey, you will be joined by Mike Dixon, Leroy Huxley, Frank McCullen as your commanding officer, as well as Salvatore Guzzo after he's absorbed into your unit once he was separated from his own. These will be your main recurrent characters from the American perspective. Throughout this campaign, you'll be privy to a variety of weapons that will have different availabilities shifting with every mission as you go through. You'll be using primarily the M1 Garand, the Springfield, the Thompson, and the Bar. You will also be able to get the iconic M1897 trench gun. This was honestly one of my favorite weapons in the American campaign and in general in the whole Call of Duty experience here. In order to help distinguish the campaigns from one another, they also include different mission sequences that use different equipment. The Americans themselves will have a scene at the start of the campaign where you target the enemies for a tank as you travel throughout a war-torn town. As for what the main goal of the American campaign is, the Americans will be responsible for pushing the main offensive along Western Europe with the Canadians. Just expect that they will be carrying your ass from time to time.
Getting a little tired of dragging your sorry ass around, Nichols.
Hey, Sergeant, how much longer are we gonna be here anyway?
At least until your crappy playing gives away our position.
Gentlemen, we are about to take part in a most daring offensive against the enemy. Glory or a glorious death awaits.
We get a choice which one?
Show the lieutenant some respect.
Who's this pissant?
Private Leslie Perron, but further introduction can wait. The Germans have pulled back to the ridge. We, mes amis, are going to take it from them.
All right, you heard the lieutenant. Get moving. Cole, get on that 50 cal. Peterson, start loading some ammo. And someone turn off that friggin' radio. That's not fighting music.
The Canadian perspective will be told from the eyes of Private Cole of the 4th Canadian Armored Division. Here, he will be working alongside Jean-Guy Robichaud, alongside with Jonathan Collard, Kyle Peterson, and Leslie Barron. The Canadians play a very active role in the war, with the very first mission that they have being to hold off a German invasion within an industrial complex, with enemies converging on all 4 sides of the building that you and your squad are holding up in. This specific mission is also particularly iconic, as for this mission, they have you destroy multiple tanks without having any armor support yourself, and in order to destroy the first one, the player is given a bazooka in order to actually do it. The Canadians in this campaign will be using primarily the Bren, the Sten, and the Lee Enfield as their weapons of choice.
Keith, give Wilkins a hat, would you? Boy can't tell his ass from his elbow. Damn good to see you again.
Wilkins, you blasted idiot. What are you doing, my friend?
Little present for the Bosch. We call her Vera. Her twin over there is Lynn. It's the usual deal. Pre-dawn insertion. Our man on the ground is a Marquis named LaRoche. Decent fellow for a Frenchman. He'll take us to meet up with the French resistance. An oxymoron if ever there was one, but they're all we have. We're wheels up in an hour, so grab your kit and load in.
Strap yourselves in, boys. We're almost at the jump point.
Incoming! Taking fire! I can't hold us up! We have to drop now!
Next in line are the Brits. You play as a returning character from Call of Duty United Offensive, Sergeant James Doyle, who with the British Army and the Frenchies as his squad mates would refer to the French rebels as, they would work to destabilize the German footholds within France. Regarding his squad mates, he will be fighting alongside Major Gerald Tiberius Ingram and Corporal Duncan Keith. This squad will meet up with the French rebels, the main Frenchies, and they'll fight alongside Pierre Laroche, Isabelle Dufontaine, and Marcel. The British fly in behind enemy lines, however, encountering heavy German fire inbound and are forced to make an emergency drop, where Doyle is nearly killed by a scouting German soldier, as shown in this cutscene. However, he ends up being saved by LaRoche upon entry. Afterwards, he's reunited with his squad and introduced to the French, whose first mission is to save Marcel from the German soldiers. Throughout the campaign, they will be using the Sten, the Lee Enfield as their primary weapons, as well as having unique driving missions throughout the British campaign.
7 kills in as many days.
We're going to need more paint.
Aye.
Later! Air support is arriving. We're pushing into town.
The hunt is on. Ride, Bohater!
The Polish campaign is going to be one of the shorter campaigns of the entire game, having only a select few missions throughout it, but these missions are arguably some of the most exciting missions of the entire storyline. They'll be using the same weapons as the Brits and the Canadians, however the Polish take a much more aggressive measure in the war than the British, fighting on the front lines. You will be operating as Bohater Wojciech, working alongside Stan Jakowicz, Joachim Rudinsky, Lukas Kowalski, and Marek Ulan. The very first mission as a Polish crew will be to work with their fellow armor crews and operate a tank to clear out the German tanks in the French countryside. This mission is perhaps one of the most memorable of the entire campaign, purely from a gameplay and nostalgia perspective. Now that we addressed the campaign, let's go ahead and take a look at the differences between this game and its predecessors. And while Call of Duty 3 did not deviate in a major way in terms of the baseline mechanics of it, it still had some significant differences that really helped build the Call of Duty experience that we have come to love in this game. The major change was the developers. While in today's Call of Duty ecosystem, we are all accustomed to having different studios working on different Call of Duty titles at different times, creating their own separate universes that build on the same mechanics, but ultimately have their own identity that was separate from the other ones. This wasn't the case when Call of Duty first launched. Infinity Ward had produced the previous games, meanwhile Treyarch had only created Call of Duty Big Red 1. This was going to be their big flagship experience as the main studio running the project. This was going to be a major departure from the development processes that the previous games underwent. By giving Treyarch the reins to handle Call of Duty 3, this would give Infinity Ward the ability to work on Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4 and create the development rhythm that has allowed the studio to continually generate content. As a side note, whether or not we like the studio release cadence that the franchise uses, that isn't the point. The main point is how this passing of the baton between studios fundamentally changed the game development cycle for Call of Duty, which no one can argue that it hasn't made any significant changes to it. Whether that's for better or for worse, your mileage may vary on that. The second major change that was coming about was that this was going to be the first multi-console platform game in the series. While Call of Duty 2 was available on the Xbox and PC, PC gaming was not at the same level that console gaming was at that time of development. The original Call of Duty games were produced in a time where gaming PCs were incredibly expensive just to be competitive with the gaming consoles on the market. I remember when I first started getting into PC gaming, PCs that I was looking at that could be affordable to my family at the time were at best 4 to 8 gigabytes of RAM with bottom tier dual core computer processors, meaning that the amount of memory and the amount of the graphical clarity that I could actually see was going to be severely limited at that time. Now obviously the games were not created in such a way that it would be overloading in the way that Call of Duty Warzone today is overloading. But even at that time, looking at those computers, the amount of money that I would have spent on that at that time would let me have a computer with over 4 times the amount of power at that same price today. Therefore, seeing that this game was going to be more graphically intense than the previous one, it still would end up yielding a less pleasurable experience than the previous games, and to those that were looking at buying a console, the console was going to be the obvious choice in terms of having a better graphical and frame rate experience. So by making this game accessible to not only Xbox and PS2 gamers, but also their next gen successors, this increased the accessibility for the consumer during a time where PC gaming was not only incredibly expensive, but was also subpar in context when you looked at console gaming, which was running games at a consistent 60 FPS at that time. Another change that the consoles brought about that was not as polished in previous iterations was its multiplayer capabilities. This game would be one of the first games to support 16-player multiplayer sessions, which would become the formula for its massively successful multiplayer appeal and was the starting point for such a feature of the franchise. And this was one of the aspects I mean when I say that this was the first true Call of Duty experience. The gameplay in multiplayer was a real step up from the predecessors and was a real framework to build multiplayer from. And if you were to play it today, I think the similarities between today's Call of Duty and Call of Duty 3 would be very apparent. Regarding the gameplay outside of how multiplayer was framed, there were also some other major changes to just how the game itself looked and worked. Beyond having sharper and more detailed graphics, as well as having a cleaner looking HUD, the game also included destructible environments. You could break windows with your melee, you could destroy cover and vehicles with your weapons and equipment, and this was not only important to the overall immersion of the game, but also you could play a strategy in regard to how you would approach your enemies. Furthermore, there was battle chatter that was also having a dual purpose function. As a Call of Duty game, you are in a squad with teammates. As such, during battle, it would be expected that you would be communicating back and forth with them. This would help increase the immersion factor of the game, but it was also meant to serve as a functional tool for the player, giving you a heads up of grenades and enemies all in real time. While these functions may not seem revolutionary now, back then it was giving the player a sense of realism that was not afforded in other games like Doom. As far as realism back then, this was one of the few games that hit the mainstream that gave you gameplay that was as realistic and as immersive as they were going to come for that time. Now, while some of these changes were revolutionary and were very welcome by the community, there were some things that were not necessarily as welcomed by them. For one, the most needless addition of the game was the use of motion control. While the Wii had seen tremendous success with the gaming market, there are a few reasons why it was successful for the Wii and not for the PS3. For one, the Wii was geared entirely towards motion control, and as such, their games were designed for, motion control. This meant that the motion control mechanics used in games were far more fine-tuned and thus more pleasurable to play than on, say, the PS3. Secondly, the Wii had taken a hold of the hype of the motion control craze and ran with it, and the people who were interested in motion control were likely not interested in Call of Duty, and those who were interested in Call of Duty likely didn't care about motion control. Thus, the addition of motion control felt clunky and unnecessary within the game, and the few times that I actually tried to use the function in those scenes, it was more likely to get me killed rather than add to the immersion of the game. The truth is, Treyarch probably thought, we have these QTEs, but I think we should throw in the motion control just to say, we did it, to get my participation trophy. And what that ended up leading to was a super unpleasant experience, using it to the point where I just had to shut that function off entirely. The fact that the PS3 controller was so light, the motion itself felt weird. I felt more like a child throwing a tantrum than I did a soldier in the middle of war fighting for my life. Another gameplay criticism being that the game implements QuickTime events, or also known as QTEs. Essentially, what a QTE is, if you don't know what it is that instead of relying on the gamer's skill and knowledge of the game, it relies on the player knowing the controller layout and hitting buttons in a quick enough succession in order to complete an action. So for instance, you might hop into a game and it's going to tell you to hit triangle, square, circle, right stick, circle, and then stick a... Call of Duty 3 implements these when there are action pieces in the game, either when you are planting a bomb, utilizing machinery in the environment, or during a combat sequence against an enemy soldier. While QTEs in of themselves aren't necessarily an egregious gameplay mechanic, especially being that it can help break up the in and out of cover gameplay, in this sense they are somewhat worthless in the grand scheme of the game itself. While using them for interacting with the environment or having a close quarter combat sequence against a soldier, it does play to the cinematic effect of those scenes. However, the other sequences for just placing bombs is rather useless. It doesn't help create the cinematic feel or immerse the player any more so than they were beforehand. If anything, it pulls them out of that immersion, and it makes it feel just like another boring task. The game could accomplish the task of creating cinematic moments within, and providing a break in gameplay by simply creating short cutscenes of the player performing the action without the need for QTE outside of maybe pressing square. And while we're on the topic of gameplay mechanics, I also want to add this quick note on regenerative health. This is another element of gameplay that is somewhat controversial within Call of Duty, and specifically Call of Duty 3. For those more realism players, it removes an element of immersion and urgency from the game. Instead of having to heal from a gunshot wound, you could now just stand outside of the death zone of grenade, sit behind cover for 5 seconds, and you are now fully recovered from the grenade instead of praying to every god you knew for a single health pack to come along your way. While this isn't a criticism levied specifically against Call of Duty 3, even though some people did levy it against it, it does have to be mentioned because while it did not introduce health regeneration, it kept it in the franchise, and if they were going to remove it from the game, this had to be the one to do so before players got used to having this healing mechanic. I personally didn't mind the healing mechanic. Games like Halo, while they do have health packs, have shields that act as regenerative health, and it isn't a mechanic that completely destroys the quality of the game or pulls me out of immersion. It just removes an element of realism from the game to an extent, which Call of Duty is allowed to do considering that they are a video game. The next criticism being that, despite being one of the longer Call of Duty titles with a near 8-hour completion time, the stories aren't really engaging. This is a criticism that I have had against this game for a long time from a narrative perspective. After having played other games similar in length and playing just even other Call of Duty games, I really felt more connected to those characters than I did to characters in this game. Even in Treyarch's following game, World at War, where I felt that Reznov was a really good character, whereas Nichols was a really poor character. He was hardly a character. The characters that you do play, even the recurring ones, are not characters that you really feel overly attached to. When one of them dies, you can feel as though the story was meant to portray a heavy moment, but it doesn't quite hit home. You don't feel attached to any of these characters, and sadly it's due to the way that they try to tell the story. The hope of showing the war through 4 different perspectives is to show just how massive the war effort is, and how difficult it is to reclaim lost ground from the Germans. However, for them, in order to tell that sort of story and to kind of create that sense of magnitude without sacrificing time in game for cutscenes or extending the overall length, the micro interactions between characters ends up being chopped, and you feel as though you lost some of the actual story arcs. One example being in the American campaign, where after they made some progression against the Germans, the American squad are sent to disarm bombs within a French town to allow Allied tanks to roll through. Their leader McCullen is obviously out of commission, with Huxley saying that he hasn't said a word in 2 days straight. Going from this...
Now that's it! I'm falling back!
Frank, put the gun down. Let's just all calm down here.
You're not crazy enough to shoot me!
Desertion's a capital offense, Guzzo. Shooting you won't be crazy. It'll be the sanest thing I've ever done.
Frank, come on now.
Guys, we got ourselves a tunnel here.
Looks like we got a way out.
All right, we're bugging out. Move! We'll continue this later.
Nichols, let's go.
To this.
Sir, the intersection's pinned down good. There's no way through. But I saw a cafe and a butcher shop that might get us a flanking position.
Here's the situation. That 42's got the square pinned down good. We gotta flank it. Sarge, through the cafe or the butcher shop? Sarge? Sarge! Damn it! Nichols, you take point. Don't get caught out in the open.
It's obvious that something has happened to the crew after taking out the Germans to take the normal kick-ass attitude of McCullen, of whom constantly has the balls to say something to anyone, is now uncharacteristically silent. During the mission, he even fails to deliver the most basic of orders to his crew, despite being built up as this leader who has seen and done just about anything that a soldier could ever see in war. Because of the lack of storytelling, and cutting the stories, flip-flopping the character between perspectives without giving us the opportunity to run back and see what happened, we don't know why McCullen is so incapable, and with that, it feels manufactured and kills any potential for feeling sympathy or even getting to learn more about him. Another part of that criticism is also the fact that the player character does not talk at all. He's a silent character, and when you play as the other characters, you never get a chance to see who you were playing as beforehand and hear what they sound like from a different perspective. This again robs any potential for character development and prevents you from actually caring about the people you play as. You don't get to imagine what these guys are saying in war as you play them because you have no idea what they would even say. In general, the character development is weak, there is no real progression, and the characters you play and the characters that you hang around with are either pretty stereotypical or entirely bland. There isn't a uniqueness to the characters. The American squad has their leader, Cullen, their co-leader, Dixon, the wisecrack Huxley, and the hothead Guzzo. And really, when you look at them, you can think of them almost like, the best way that I could think of them is like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You know, you have McCullen, and he would be the one with the blue, the blue wrap. The co-leader, Dixon, he would probably be the purple one. Huxley would end up being the, Donatello, the one with the orange. And then you would have Raphael, that being Guzzo. Like, it's almost stereotypical. Like, it's the fact that I can take another completely unrelated series and apply them, and you can still see those same characters in this game, shows just how stereotypical that they are. And then when you look at the Polish squad, they're even worse, because they're just entirely bland. There isn't much that made me gravitate towards them as I was playing through the game. Their interactions just also lack substance. They all feel very manufactured, nothing seems to feel genuine, and there are very few scenes where it doesn't have a sanitized feel to it, but the few interactions and dialogue pieces that have weight to them that really make the player care are very few and far between. And when a character dies, there isn't much reason for them to care. When McCullen dies at the bridge, sacrificing himself for the good of the mission, it is the perfect scenario for you to care about his death. Here was this hard-ass leader who had no worries chewing out his soldiers, who had psychological trauma occur that was so severe that he was even incapable of just speaking to the men who he had shared and survived numerous firefights with. And now that he realizes that his inaction as a leader put not only the mission in jeopardy, but put his soldiers' lives in jeopardy, he puts himself in the line of fire and sacrifices himself for the mission, and as a tongue-in-cheek final words, he tells the renegade of the group to go to hell.
Tell Guzzo. Tell him. Tell him to go to hell.
You did good, Sarge.
And the scene just doesn't hold the weight. It didn't hold the weight for me as a kid, it didn't hold the weight for me when I replayed it, and it doesn't hold the weight for me now as I'm writing this. However, if you take Halo Reach, we have a game with the same number of hours where there's tremendously more character development, the death of the other characters have an honest-to-God impact on the player.
First glassing? Me too. Don't worry, I'm on it. Our best option is a fallout bunker on sub-level 2, 96 meters northeast. We get orders from Holland, sir?
We're being redeployed to Sword Base.
Sword? Covenant own it now.
Which is why they want us for a torch and burn op. Keep Dr. Halsey's excavation data from falling into enemy hands.
If it hasn't already.
Maybe, but according to Holland, the Covenant are still hunting for something.
Where does he get off calling a demolition a priority one?
Come on! come on, get in!
Let's go, come on! Close the doors! Faster!
While he does speak, he is not hyper vocal. You feel sad when he doesn't survive the ordeal that he was put through. Lastly, when you're talking about the game itself, there were revolutionary elements to it, and I think that it did bring in new enough elements to delineate itself from the other games and show real progression from one game to the next. The experiences were pretty much the same, but when you're looking at a strictly narrative perspective, even if you're a new studio working on this, you had worked on a previous game before that, and the studio, you would also be able to get other writers to be able to work on this project. So for you to be basically 3 games into a franchise, coming up on your 4th if you want to throw Big Red One in there, it doesn't seem reasonable for you to have such a poor narrative perspective. For me, if you were going to be 4 games in, you should have a good storyline. Your characters should feel deep in depth. You know, they should have something there that makes you actually like them. For you to be an 8-hour long game and you put it up against other games that you're trying to get people to walk away from to go and play your game, and they have better narrative perspectives, you should be able to come up with a decent storyline, and you should be able to tell a better story that actually grabs the player from a narrative perspective. What Call of Duty 3 did do right, the first that should be mentioned is the multiplayer formula that they created here. The 16-player style of Call of Duty 3 would become the predecessor to what would make the future iterations of Call of Duty fast-paced and enjoyable. Call of Duty 3 was in a weird spot, being a more realistic game that could have leaned towards a Battlefield style and try to compete. Their levels were larger than they used to be, but there were also more cinematic scenes. They could have expanded and gone for larger to be competitive with Battlefield. But after having created that formula and it being a successful one could say that they would lay the groundwork for Modern Warfare, and Modern Warfare would explode on that foundation that they laid before. That isn't to suggest that Modern Warfare would have flopped without it, but rather that the success of Call of Duty 3 would help amplify the waves that it caused. Something to note, when designing this game, it's obvious that the developers were less concerned about the story and more so of the design and visual representation, which was clearly shown in the game and as I laid out in my previous criticisms. They wanted to make their levels action-packed and expansive, and because of that size and direction, you were able to have iconic scenes like the Battle of St. Lo.
Discussion, Private. Dixon, take Huxley and backstop our armor. The rest of you, including you, are with me. Over the top. Move up.
Be able to drive a tank throughout the country, and then whip around that same countryside in a Jeep. The cinematics of the game took advantage of the level design even when there wasn't a cutscene. They still knew how to create a sense of awe in the player. You had a feeling that the battlefield was not only large, but it was also full of paths and action. while the story wasn't engaging, the gameplay was. It wasn't super hectic in the sense that there was a lot of running and gunning, but rather there were just so many enemies that it was hard to track them. Speaking of the enemies, these enemies were more intelligent and proved to be a greater problem than in the previous games. They weren't super soldiers by any means, nor would they always be quote-unquote intelligent, but they would cause problems for the player and as such did not make these skirmishes easy. Another thing that the game did really well was its sound design. The franchise has had a number of guns throughout the series that have become incredibly well loved amongst the fans because of their stats and their visuals. However, something else that really adds to that is the sound of the guns. Games like Black Ops 1 and 3 and then Modern Warfare 1 and 3 had gun sounds that were satisfying but didn't have that visceral feeling behind it. However, when you look towards Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops 2, and World at War, this game sits amongst them regarding the feeling of the guns. They felt like they had punch in this game. The most satisfying feeling that I had while I was playing the game was using the trench gun in one of their levels. Certain weapons just feel good to shoot in this game, and for the most part, it was hard to point out guns in this particular iteration that did not feel fun or had that visceral feeling behind it. And lastly, the game actually had some replay value, shockingly. Between the different difficulties and the relative routine of the enemies, it could be a speedrun game. Add on to the fact that the game has achievements to earn, while the replay value isn't, shockingly amazing, when in comparison to a game like, say, Kingdom Hearts, where they have a new Game Plus option that add new missions and elements to the game, it does have value that can bring you back to it when you talk about the campaign in of itself, but then you also go on ahead and you look at the actual multiplayer that adds an entirely another level of reason to really come back and play it. There's a reason why you buy the game, you play it, put it back in the case, and then you're going to open it back up. Not because you haven't just finished the campaign, but because you actually want to go ahead and run through it maybe a second time. Or that you want to go ahead and play with your buddies. So Call of Duty 3 was, like the previous games before it, easy to pick up. No matter if you were new to the series like I was when it first came home with me, or if you had been religiously following the franchise since its inception. This game is important to the franchise, however, for a few reasons. For the critical success of this game, this would give leeway for Treyarch to continue developing Call of Duty games, which studio would arguably create some of the strongest games in the franchise. They also help lay the groundwork for what to expect in future Call of Duty games. With the implementation of more cinematic scenes and strong multiplayer formula, this will be the launching point for some of the strongest games in the series like Black Ops 1, a game heavy in cinematics. And to add on to that, this was also the first multi-console platform of the series, so this would have been the first taste of the Call of Duty franchise who were just now buying into the next-gen consoles for that time frame, and also those who had only owned a PlayStation 2. So this would help set the tone for what to expect from the series in the future. However, when I'm giving my thoughts on the game, I actually have two opinions of it. If we're going to look at it from a more objective standpoint, I think the game did its job. It focused less on story and created a game that was a visual showcase for its time. The level design was strong, the cinematics were captivating. From a gameplay perspective, there's very little to say that I don't like about it, except when you look at the QTEs. However, when looking at it from a narrative perspective and character development perspective, I feel as though that they dropped the ball. These sorts of games are not impossible to create characters that are intriguing. World at War was able to create a character in Reznov that would be hard to separate from that game, and if you removed him would be an entirely different game. The Modern Warfare series in of itself is entirely built on character development. So for them to have a lackluster story, despite being technically 4 games in if you count Big Red One, is a little disheartening. It's sad because it pulls away from how good the game actually is because of the lack of an interesting storyline or even character. Had they given themselves 4 more months, they could have created a better story that would have added weight to each mission of the campaign. Now that's not to say that the campaign was necessarily bad, and that the lack of narrative vigor really reduced the game itself. The campaign was still really good, and it wasn't as though that the story was so flat that you couldn't enjoy it. It's just rather that it wasn't as strong as it could have been, and that if you had a stronger narrative perspective and you delved into the characters, maybe added an additional 2 hours of gameplay on the game, you could have had an even stronger game, and you could have really lived out the full potential of what Call of Duty 3 could have been, even though it was still a phenomenal game. Now, my other opinion, my biased opinion, I love this game. This was my first experience with not only the series, but in general first-person shooters. This was a really good memory from my childhood and a conduit for bonding with my cousin, with whom I still share a really strong bond with today. The reason why I wanted to make this video is because I love this game, and I wanted it to be the first video and the first game that I analyzed and recorded. It also gave me, another reason to run through the game again just for the sake of running through it again. Me personally, just out of sheer nostalgia, this game will go down as one of my favorites in the Call of Duty franchise, and arguably one of my favorite games to have ever been put into a PlayStation 2. So I want to thank you all for watching this video. If this is going to be my very first video to go up on the channel. Now, if you don't know what my channel really is going to be, and if you stuck around this long, again, thank you. You are an absolute trooper. And if you are sticking around for the outro, again, I triple and quadruple thank you. I skipped the double because, because that's just me. I'm doing this off the cuff. I don't have a script for this part. I just kind of wanted to talk to my audience here, whoever I get to. My channel is really going to be a lot about analyzing games and giving pseudo reviews of them and giving analysis to those games. It's also going to be, going back and looking at older tech. In particular, again, when I'm talking about games, I'm talking about older games and perhaps ones that didn't quite hit the mark that we were expecting or hit beyond the mark. On top of that, there's going to be some other games that I decide to play and make videos of. So it'll be a little bit of a mishmash between stuff, but for the most part, you're going to see a lot of analysis videos, and you're also going to see a lot of, tech videos. And then I'm going to throw in like those little side gameplays, and on the side, I'm also going to be doing streaming. So on Twitch, it's going to be the same deal, competent casual, and I'll end up doing like story Let's Plays on there. So I want to thank you all for watching. And any support that you leave on this video, I really appreciate, because coming to this video, it's been a long time in the making. I've remade this thing at least 5 times, and this is going to be like my true final chance at YouTube. So thank you all for watching. Leave a comment down below if you got something to say, subscribe if you'd like to stay, and I would like to wish you all a very nice day.